Admiral Hyun-woo stood in front of the giant screen that showed space around Earth. 300 alien ships floated there like dark clouds blocking the stars. Their massive hulls reflected the light from Earth's sun, creating shadows that fell across the human space stations below. Behind him, President So-young held a datapad in her hands. Her knuckles were white from gripping it too tight. The message on the pad came from the Galactic Council. It was the worst demand they had ever made. Hyun-woo could see the anger in So-young's eyes as she read it again. For 50 years, humans had been part of the Galactic Council. For 50 years, they had followed orders and accepted limits on what they could do. But this was too much. Captain Dong-hyun walked into the command center. His boots made sharp sounds on the metal floor. He carried another datapad with more messages from the Council fleet. His face was grim. The aliens had given humans 72 hours to agree to their demands or face what they called corrective action. So-young looked up from her pad. The demands were simple, but impossible. The Council wanted humans to destroy all their military ships. They wanted humans to give up their technology for making new worlds livable. They wanted all human colonies moved to small areas of space that the Council would choose. And they wanted alien overseers placed on every human world to watch everything humans did. Hyun-woo had served in the human fleet for 30 years. He had fought pirates in the outer systems and helped evacuate colonies when natural disasters struck. He had always followed orders from Earth and from the Council. But he had never been asked to surrender everything that made humans strong and free. The Council said humans were too aggressive and expanded too fast. They said human technology was dangerous and needed to be controlled. They said human colonies were built in the wrong places and needed to be moved. But Hyun-woo knew the real reason. The Council was afraid of humans. In 50 years, humans had built more colonies than some alien races had built in 500 years. Human ships could travel faster and farther than most Council vessels. Human scientists had learned to make planets livable in decades instead of centuries. The old alien races that controlled the Council did not like seeing a young species succeed so quickly. So-young set down her datapad and looked at the screen showing the alien fleet. Each ship was larger than anything humans had built. Each ship carried enough firepower to destroy cities. But humans had never backed down from a fight they believed was right. This fight was about more than military power or technology. This fight was about the right to exist as free people. Dong-hyun activated his own datapad and showed new intelligence reports. The Council fleet had been gathering for months. Ships from 12 different alien races had come together to threaten Earth. But the intelligence also showed something else. Many of the alien crews were unhappy about being here. Some alien governments had argued against using force against humans. The Council was not as united as they wanted humans to believe. Hyun-woo studied the fleet positions on the screen. The aliens had arranged their ships to block all major space lanes leading away from Earth. They controlled the jump points that human ships used to travel to other systems. It was a perfect blockade designed to trap humans in their home system. But Hyun-woo had learned long ago that no blockade was perfect. So-young called her advisors into the command center. Defense Minister Jae-sung arrived first, followed by Science Advisor Min-ji and Intelligence Chief Bo-young. Each of them had been preparing for this moment, even though they had hoped it would never come. For years, they had quietly made plans for what to do if the Council pushed too hard. Bo-young spread out holographic displays showing Council military positions throughout the galaxy. The aliens had ships stationed at every major human colony. They had surrounded human trade routes and blocked access to resources humans needed. It was not just a blockade of Earth. It was an attempt to strangle all of human civilization at once. Min-ji activated her own displays, showing human technology projects that had been hidden from Council oversight. For decades, human scientists had been working on secret projects in hidden laboratories. They had developed new weapons, new defenses, and new ways of traveling between stars. The Council thought they knew everything about human capabilities. They were wrong. Jae-sung showed military readiness reports from human colonies across the galaxy. Despite Council restrictions on fleet size and weapons, humans had found ways to prepare for war. They had built hidden shipyards in asteroid fields. They had trained civilian crews to fight. They had stockpiled supplies and equipment on every world. If the Council wanted a fight, humans were ready to give them one. So Young listened to all the reports and then made her decision. She activated the emergency broadcast system that could reach every human settlement in the galaxy. Her message would go out on all frequencies and in all languages that humans spoke. She would tell 20 billion humans spread across hundreds of worlds what she had decided. The broadcast began with So Young standing in front of the same screen that showed the alien fleet. Her voice was calm but firm. She told humans everywhere that the Council had made demands that no free people could accept. She told them that the time for compromise and negotiation was over. She told them that humanity would no longer bow to alien masters who wanted to control every aspect of human life. Yunwu watched as So Young delivered the words that would change everything. The president announced that humans were formally withdrawing from all agreements with the Galactic Council. Human colonies would no longer follow Council law. Human ships would no longer recognize Council authority. Human governments would no longer accept Council interference in human affairs. The message was broadcast to the Council fleet as well as to human settlements. The alien commanders would know immediately that their threats had failed. Instead of frightening humans into submission, they had pushed humans into rebellion. The Council had wanted to control humanity through fear, but they had only created an enemy that would never surrender. Donghyun received confirmation that the broadcast had reached all human worlds. On colony after colony, human leaders were activating emergency protocols. Military reserves were being called up. Civilian populations were moving to secure locations. Hidden weapons were being brought out of storage. The entire human species was preparing for war against an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. So Young ended her broadcast with words that would be remembered for generations. She told the galaxy that humans had tried to be peaceful, members of the galactic community. They had followed Council rules and accepted Council limits on their freedom. But when pushed too far, humans would not negotiate. They would fight. The screen went dark as the broadcast ended. In the command center, the only sound was the quiet hum of computers processing data from across human space. The alien fleet still surrounded Earth, but everything had changed. The Council had expected humans to surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Instead, they had declared war against the most powerful organization in the galaxy. Hyun-woo looked at his president and nodded. The die was cast. There would be no going back now. Commander Ji-won moved through the diplomatic quarter of Council Station Alpha with careful steps. Her team of 12 humans walked behind her, each carrying bags that looked like personal belongings, but contained much more important things. They were the last human diplomats in Council space, and they had less than 6 hours to reach the evacuation ships before the Council realized what was happening. The station corridors were filled with aliens from dozens of different species. Most of them ignored the humans, but Ji-won noticed some watching her team with curious eyes. Word of President So Young's broadcast was spreading through the galaxy faster than official Council communications. Some aliens were starting to ask questions about why humans had chosen war over submission. Ji-won's comm device buzzed quietly with a message from her contact in the station's security office. The Council had ordered all human personnel to be detained, but the order would not be implemented for another 4 hours. That gave her team enough time to reach the hidden docking bay where Captain Tae-ho waited with his stealth transport. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, General Taemin stood in a room that did not officially exist. The chamber was carved into the heart of an asteroid that human charts listed as empty space. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of every Council fleet in known space. His staff officers watched the displays with the intensity of predators studying their prey. Operation Silent Storm was beginning. For 20 years, humans had been secretly preparing for this moment. While the Council believed they controlled human military capabilities through treaties and inspections, humans had been building a hidden war machine that could strike anywhere in the galaxy without warning. Taemin activated the first phase of the operation with a simple command code. Across human space, vessels that the Council thought had been scrapped or decommissioned suddenly came alive. Hidden shipyards began launching craft that had been built in complete secrecy. Space stations that appeared to be civilian installations revealed their true military nature. Captain Dong Hyun felt his ship vibrate as its engines came online for the first time in 3 years. The Rising Phoenix had been officially decommissioned after the Treaty of Rigel limited human fleet sizes. But the ship had never been scrapped. Instead, it had been hidden in a hollowed-out asteroid and modified with technology the Council had never seen. The bridge of the Rising Phoenix looked nothing like a traditional human warship. Most of the controls were operated by artificial, intelligent systems that could react faster than any organic crew. The weapons were powered by energy sources that produced no signatures the Council could detect. Most importantly, the ship could travel through space without being seen by any sensors the aliens possessed. Dong Hyun's crew of 30 humans had spent years training for this moment. They knew every system on the ship and could operate in complete silence if necessary. They had studied Council ship designs and learned the weaknesses in alien technology. They were ready to take the war to an enemy that had never faced determined human resistance. Dr. Minji stood in her laboratory beneath the surface of Mars, surrounded by displays showing biological data from every known alien species. As the head of human xenobiology research, she had spent decades studying the races that made up the Galactic Council. What she had learned would shock the aliens if they knew. Most Council species had not fought a real war in centuries. Their conflicts had become ritualized affairs with rules and customs that limited casualties and destruction. They used massive fleets and overwhelming numbers to win battles, but they had forgotten how to adapt when faced with an unexpected enemy. They expected their opponents to fight the same way they did, using the same tactics and following the same rules. Humans fought differently. Human military doctrine emphasized speed, surprise, and adaptability over raw firepower. Human commanders were trained to find weaknesses in enemy plans and exploit them ruthlessly. Human soldiers were taught to improvise and overcome obstacles that would stop other species. The Council was about to learn what made humans dangerous. Minji activated secure communication links to research stations across human space. Scientists who had been working on classified projects for years received orders to implement protocols they had hoped would never be needed. Weapons that existed only in prototype form were rushed into production. Defensive systems that had been tested in secret were activated on every human world. The first test of human capabilities came 12 hours after So Young's broadcast. A Council enforcement squadron of 6 heavy cruisers arrived at the human colony of New Seoul, expecting to find a defenseless world ready to surrender. Instead, they found a planet protected by energy shields that their sensors could not penetrate, and orbital platforms that appeared from nowhere to surround their ships. Commander Su Jin led the defense of New Seoul from the bridge of a battle station that had been disguised as a mining platform. Her crew watched as the Council ships tried to break through the planetary shields with their main guns. The alien weapons designed to destroy cities barely made the shields flicker. Human defensive technology had advanced far beyond what the EU Council believed possible. The Council squadron commander sent a message demanding immediate surrender. Sujin responded by demonstrating the capabilities of her hidden weapons. Precisely targeted energy beams disabled the alien ship's engines and weapons without breaching their hulls. Within minutes, 6 Council warships were floating helplessly, in space, unable to fight or flee. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as Council forces encountered human colonies that refused to submit. Every world the aliens expected to capture easily turned out to be a fortress bristling with hidden defenses. Every human settlement they tried to occupy had been evacuated and booby-trapped. Every space station they approached revealed weapons that could cripple their ships. Back on Earth, Admiral Hyun-woo received reports from human commanders throughout the galaxy. The Council's initial attacks had been repelled everywhere. Not a single human world had been captured, and dozens of Council ships had been disabled or destroyed. The aliens were discovering that their intelligence about human capabilities was years out of date, but Hyun-woo knew the real war was just beginning. The Council had sent only small forces to intimidate human colonies. When they realized that intimidation would not work, they would bring their full military might to bear. Millions of alien warships would converge on human space with orders to crush the rebellion by any means necessary. That was why humans had prepared something special for the Council leadership. While alien commanders focused on military targets, human special forces teams were infiltrating Council space with a different mission. They would not attack alien worlds or destroy alien ships. Instead, they would deliver a message that the Council could not ignore. Colonel Young-Ho led one of those teams through the maintenance tunnels beneath Council headquarters on the capital, world of Nexus Prime. His soldiers moved in complete silence, their equipment designed to avoid detection by any known alien sensor. They had one goal: to plant a device in the Council chamber that would broadcast a message from President So Young directly to the leaders of 12 alien races. The device was no larger than a human hand, but it contained enough power to override every communication system on the planet. When activated, it would ensure that So Young's words reached not just the Council leadership, but every alien citizen on Nexus Prime. The message would be simple: humans wanted peace, but they would not accept slavery. Young-Ho and his team reached their target without triggering any alarms. The Council chamber was empty at night, protected only by automated security systems that could not detect human stealth technology. The Colonel placed the device in a location where it could not be found or removed without destroying the chamber itself. The Council would receive humanity's message whether they wanted to hear it or not. As reports came in from across the galaxy, it became clear that the Council had made a critical miscalculation. They had expected humans to fight like other species, using conventional tactics and following established rules of war. Instead, humans were waging a conflict unlike anything the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. The Council had pushed humanity too far, expecting submission and finding defiance instead. Now they would learn why some species choose to fight rather than surrender, and why the human spirit could not be broken by threats or overwhelming force. The war for human freedom had begun. Council Speaker Vorthak stood before the Great Assembly Hall where representatives of 12 alien races had gathered in emergency session. His forearms gestured at the holographic displays that showed disaster reports from across Council space. In the past week, human forces had struck at targets throughout the galaxy with a precision and coordination that should have been impossible for such a young species. The massive chamber buzzed with alien voices speaking in dozens of different languages. Representatives demanded answers that Vorthak could not provide. How had humans hidden their true military capabilities for so long? How were they able to coordinate attacks across thousands of light years without the Council detecting their communications? How had they managed to disable Council installations without killing anyone, making the Council look incompetent rather than defeated? Vorthak activated the central display to show the extent of human operations. 12 major Council facilities had been attacked simultaneously. Military bases, supply depots, and communication relays had all been targeted with surgical precision. In each case, human forces had overwhelmed the defenses, completed their objectives, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The attacks were designed to humiliate rather than destroy. At Station Nexus 7, human commandos had disabled the main power grid, but left the life support systems intact. The station's crew of 3,000 aliens was trapped but unharmed, requiring a massive rescue operation that tied up Council resources for days. Similar operations had forced the Council to divert ships and personnel from offensive operations to rescue and repair missions. Lieutenant Su Jin piloted her fighter through the debris field around Nexus 7, documenting the extent of human success. The massive station hung dark and lifeless in space, its weapon systems destroyed and its shields down, but emergency lights still flickered in the habitation sections, and rescue ships were already arriving to evacuate the crew. The humans had sent a message. They could destroy Council installations at will, but they chose mercy over massacre. This restraint was more effective than simple destruction would have been. If humans had killed thousands of Council personnel, the aliens could have portrayed them as monsters and justified any response. Instead, the humans had demonstrated superior tactics and technology while maintaining the moral high ground. They were not conquerors seeking to destroy their enemies. but freedom fighters defending their right to exist. Admiral Hyunwoo studied intelligence reports from the hidden command center aboard his flagship Defiance. The massive dreadnought had been built in secret over 10 years, using technology reverse-engineered from captured Council equipment. Its existence was unknown to alien intelligence services that believed they had complete knowledge of human military capabilities. Intelligence Officer Bo Young presented analysis of Council communications intercepted during the past week. The alien leadership was beginning to fracture under the pressure of human resistance. Several member species were questioning the wisdom of continued conflict with humans. The economic cost of mobilizing their fleets was straining governments that had grown accustomed to peace and prosperity. The Althari delegation had formally requested a negotiated settlement. The Vegan Confederacy was withdrawing ships from forward positions, claiming they were needed for defense of their home systems. Even the militant Saurian Empire was beginning to ask whether the subjugation of humanity was worth the resources being expended. But Vorthak and his core supporters remained committed to crushing human resistance. They could not allow a younger species to successfully defy Council authority. If humans were permitted to withdraw from Council control, other species might follow their example. The carefully maintained order that had governed the galaxy for millennia could collapse within decades. The Council's response was predictable and dangerous. They decided to escalate the conflict by threatening human civilian populations directly. If humans would not surrender to protect their military forces, perhaps they would surrender to protect their families and children. Dr. Minji received the threat assessment from her contacts within Council intelligence services. The aliens were preparing to target human colonies with overwhelming force, intending to demonstrate that resistance was futile. They believed that faced with the destruction of entire worlds, human leaders would have no choice but to capitulate to all Council demands. But Minji had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. Every human colony had been equipped with defensive systems that the Council had never seen. Planetary shield generators powered by fusion reactors could protect entire continents from orbital bombardment. Underground cities could shelter millions of people indefinitely. Most importantly, each world had weapons that could make any invasion attempt prohibitively expensive. The first test came at the agricultural world of New Busan, home to 8 million human colonists. A Council battle fleet of 50 warships arrived expecting to find a defenseless farming community that would surrender rather than face destruction. Instead, they encountered a fortress world that had been preparing for war while pretending to grow crops. Colonel Sung-min commanded the planetary defense network from a bunker buried 3 kilometers beneath the capital city. His displays showed the alien fleet taking positions around the planet, their massive guns trained on population centers. The Council commander transmitted the standard surrender demand, giving the colonists 12 hours to evacuate or face the consequences. Sung-min activated the planetary shields just as the first alien salvo struck the atmosphere. Energy beams that could melt mountains struck barrier fields that absorbed and redirected the attacks harmlessly into space. The colonists below continued their daily lives, protected by technology that made their world nearly invulnerable to orbital assault. The Council fleet increased their firepower, bringing all weapons to bear on the shields protecting New Busan. For 6 hours, they pounded the barriers with everything they had, using enough energy to destroy a dozen unprotected worlds. The shields held without weakening, powered by reactors that drew energy from the planet's core itself. Frustrated by their inability to break through the defenses, the Council commander ordered a ground assault. Troop transports launched from the orbiting warships carrying 50,000 alien soldiers equipped with the finest weapons and armor the Council could provide. They expected to overwhelm any ground resistance and capture the shield generators. The transports never reached the surface. As they entered the upper atmosphere, they encountered defensive satellites that had been invisible until they opened fire. Precisely targeted energy beams disabled the transports without destroying them, forcing them to make emergency landings in designated areas where human forces waited to take the crews prisoner. Within hours, 50,000 Council soldiers found themselves in comfortable detention facilities where they were treated according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war. They were fed, given medical care, and allowed to communicate with their families. But they were also shown recordings of their failed assault, demonstrating that humans could have killed them all, but chose mercy instead. President So-young used the successful defense of New Busan to address the galaxy once again. Her message was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching not just council leadership but ordinary citizens of every member species. She spoke directly to people who had been told that humans were dangerous aggressors who threatened galactic peace. So-young explained that humans had never wanted to fight the council, but had been forced to defend themselves against impossible demands. She showed evidence of council preparations to destroy human worlds, contrasting it with human restraint and avoiding alien casualties. She asked the peoples of the galaxy whether they wanted to live under a government that threatened genocide to maintain its power. The broadcast reached billions of aliens who had never heard the human side of the conflict. On worlds throughout council space, citizens began asking their governments why they were supporting a war against a species that seemed more interested in self-defense than conquest. Public opinion, which had been largely ignored by council leadership for centuries, began to shift in ways that would have profound consequences. Back on Earth, Admiral Hyun-woo received word that 3 council member species had formally requested mediation talks. The monolithic unity that had enabled the council to dominate the galaxy for so long was beginning to crack under pressure from human resistance and their own citizens' questions. The war was entering a new phase where military success would matter, less than political maneuvering. Humans had proven they could not be conquered by force, but their ultimate victory would depend on convincing the galaxy that freedom was better than the stability offered by authoritarian rule. Captain Young-ho crouched in the maintenance shaft above Council Supply Depot Gamma 7, listening to the alien voices discussing inventory reports below. His Special Forces team had spent 3 days infiltrating the massive facility that supplied council fleets throughout this sector of the galaxy. Their mission was not destruction but intelligence gathering, and what they were learning would change everything. Sergeant Yoon-hae monitored the team's surveillance equipment as they recorded conversations between alien supply officers. The depot commanders were complaining about resource shortages caused by the human conflict. Ships were being recalled from patrol duties to participate in anti-human operations. Supply lines that had operated smoothly for decades were breaking, down under the strain of supporting a war economy. Young-ho's team had infiltrated similar facilities across council space, and the pattern was consistent everywhere. The cost of fighting humans was enormous and growing larger every day. Species that had contributed ships to the anti-human coalition were beginning to question whether the expense was justified by the results achieved. Meanwhile, intelligence. Officer Bo Young analyzed intercepted communications from her station aboard the Defiance. The data painted a picture of an organization under increasing stress. Council member species were filing formal complaints about the economic impact of the war. Trade routes disrupted by military operations were causing supply shortages on dozens of worlds. Citizens who had enjoyed peace and prosperity for generations were asking why their governments had chosen conflict over negotiation. The most significant development was happening within the council itself. The united front that had threatened humanity with overwhelming force was fragmenting as different species pursued their own interests. The Althari had already withdrawn most of their ships from anti-human operations, claiming they were needed for defense against pirates in their home systems. The Vegan Confederacy was reducing its financial contributions to the war effort, citing budget constraints. Even among species that remained committed to the conflict, there were growing doubts about the methods being employed. When the council leadership proposed using planet crackers against human worlds, several delegations had walked out of the planning sessions. These weapons were designed to destroy entire planets and had not been used in warfare for over 2,000 years. Speaker Vorthak faced the most serious challenge to his authority since taking power. Representatives who had once followed his lead without question were now demanding explanations for decisions that seemed to benefit no one. The human conflict had exposed weaknesses in the council system that had been hidden by centuries of unchallenged dominance. Dr. Minji received intelligence reports indicating that the Council was preparing to escalate beyond all previous limits. Frustrated by their inability to defeat human forces through conventional means, Vorthok's faction had authorized the deployment of weapons of mass destruction. Planet crackers were being moved to positions where they could threaten major human colonies. But Minji had anticipated this possibility years ago. Working with teams of scientists across human space, she had developed countermeasures that the Council could not imagine. The technology was based on principles that alien science had dismissed as impossible, but human researchers had proven that the impossible could be achieved with enough determination and creativity. The test would come at New Busan, the agricultural world that had already withstood one Council assault. Long-range sensors detected a fleet of 12 massive vessels approaching the system. Each ship carried a planet cracker weapon capable of destroying a world with a single shot. The message was clear: surrender or watch 8 million humans die. Colonel Sungmin received evacuation orders from Earth Command, but the colonists of New Busan voted to stay and fight. They had built their world with their own hands over 3 generations, and they would not abandon it to alien threats. Instead, they would demonstrate that human ingenuity could overcome any weapon the Council could deploy. As the planet cracker fleet took positions around New Busan, Sungmin activated systems that had been hidden even from most of the colony's defenders. Deep beneath the planet's surface, machines that had been building and testing for 20 years came online. The colonists felt a strange vibration through the ground as massive generators reached full power. The Council fleet commander transmitted his ultimatum. The colonists had 1 hour to begin evacuation or face complete annihilation. No shields could protect against planet cracker weapons, and no defense could stop the total destruction of their world. Surrender was the only option that would preserve human lives. Sungmin responded by activating New Busan's ultimate defensive measure. The entire planet began to flicker and fade from normal space as quantum field generators created a phase variance that moved the world partially into subspace. It was technology that pushed the boundaries of physics, requiring massive amounts of energy and precise calculations to avoid destroying the planet they were trying to save. The planet cracker weapons fired at empty space. Where New Busan had been moments before, only vacant darkness remained. The most powerful weapons in the Council arsenal had struck at nothing, their planet-killing energy dissipating harmlessly into the void. 8 million humans had vanished, beyond the reach of any known technology. For 6 hours, the Council fleet searched for any trace of the missing world. Their sensors detected no debris, no energy signatures, no evidence that New Busan had ever existed. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the planet reappeared exactly where it had been. Every building stood intact, every colonist was unharmed, and the defensive shields came back online as if nothing had happened. The psychological impact was devastating to Council forces throughout the galaxy. Humans had not just survived the ultimate weapon, but had made it completely irrelevant. If planet crackers could not threaten human worlds, what hope did the Council have of forcing human surrender through intimidation? News of New Busan's survival spread through Council space faster than official communications could suppress it. Citizens who had been told that human resistance was doomed learned that their government's most powerful weapons were useless against human technology. The narrative of Council invincibility that had maintained order for millennia was crumbling. Ambassador Jinnah found herself in an unprecedented situation. Council member species that had supported the war against humanity were now requesting direct negotiations with human representatives. They wanted to understand how humans had achieved such technological advances and whether similar breakthroughs were possible for their own people. The Althari were the first to make formal contact, sending a delegation to the neutral station at Kepler Junction where humans maintained a diplomatic presence. Their message was simple. They no longer recognized Council authority over their internal affairs and wished to establish independent relations with humanity. Other species quickly followed. The Zephyrian Trade Federation announced it was withdrawing from all anti-human operations and opening its space to human merchants. The Crystalline Collective declared neutrality, and offered to mediate between humans and any council species seeking peaceful resolution of conflicts. Admiral Hyunwoo watched as the monolithic council began to dissolve into competing factions. Some species remained loyal to Vorthak's leadership, but their number decreased every day. Others openly challenged council policies and demanded fundamental changes to the organization. A few had begun the process of formal withdrawal from council membership entirely. The war that had begun as humanity's fight for freedom was becoming a galaxy-wide revolution against authoritarian rule. Species that had accepted council domination for centuries were rediscovering their own capacity for independent action. The example set by human resistance was inspiring changes that would reshape galactic civilization. But Vorthak and his remaining allies were not ready to surrender their power without one final desperate gamble. Intelligence reports suggested they were gathering their most loyal forces for a massive assault on Earth itself. If they could not break human resistance through threats against colonies, they would attempt to destroy the source of human defiance directly. The Council's dilemma had become impossible to resolve through military means, but they seemed determined to continue fighting rather than accept the loss of their authority. The final phase of the conflict would determine whether the galaxy's future belonged to those who chose freedom or those who clung to power. Ambassador Jinnah stood in the great assembly hall of Kepler Station, watching as delegates from 37 different species took their seats around the circular chamber. 6 months ago, this meeting would have been impossible. The Galactic Council would never have permitted member species to negotiate independently with humans, and most aliens would never have dared to defy Council authority so openly. But the galaxy had changed. The war that began with humanity's refusal to surrender had become something much larger. Species that had accepted Council rule for centuries were discovering their own voices and demanding the right to determine their own futures. The monolithic structure that had governed known space for millennia was cracking apart. Jinnah had been a diplomatic attaché when the crisis began. Now she found herself serving as humanity's chief representative to a coalition of species that had never existed before. Her job was no longer to negotiate with Council leaders who refused to recognize human rights, but to help build a new framework for galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation instead of enforced compliance. The transformation had not been easy or bloodless. Admiral Hyunwoo's forces had fought 3 major battles against Council loyalists who refused to accept the changing order. But even these conflicts demonstrated how far the situation had shifted. In each case, Hyunwoo's fleets had been reinforced by ships from former Council members who now fought alongside humans against their former government. The battle for the Rigel system had been the turning point. Speaker Vorthak had assembled the largest fleet in Council history, gathering over 2,000 warships from species that remained loyal to his leadership. Their target was not Earth, but the human colony of New Angeles, which had become a symbol of successful resistance to Council authority. General Taimin had commanded the defense of New Angeles, with a combined human and allied fleet of 800 ships. The numbers favored Vorthak's forces, but military strength alone no longer determined the outcome of battles. The Council fleet included crews who questioned their orders and commanders who doubted the wisdom of their government's policies. The battle began with Vorthak's traditional demand for surrender, broadcast on all frequencies so that both sides could hear his ultimatum. He offered the defenders one final chance to submit to Council authority and avoid the complete destruction of their forces. The response came not from Taimin, but from Captain Yun Su, commander of an Althari cruiser fighting alongside the humans. Yun Su's message was simple and devastating. She announced that her people had formally withdrawn from the Galactic Council and no longer recognized Vorthak's authority to issue orders to anyone. Her ship and crew were fighting as free beings defending the right of all species to live without masters. Similar messages came from vegan, Zephyrian, and crystalline ships in the Allied fleet. The psychological impact on Vorthak's forces was immediate and severe. Crews who had joined the fleet to defend galactic order found themselves fighting against former allies who claimed to be defending galactic freedom. Ships began withdrawing from the battle without permission from their commanders. Some vessels switched sides entirely, joining the Allied fleet and turning their guns on their former comrades. Within hours, Vorthak's grand fleet had disintegrated. Less than half of his ships remained under his control, and many of those were retreating toward Council space as fast as their engines could carry them. The largest military force in galactic history had been defeated not by superior weapons, but by the power of ideas that resonated with beings who yearned for freedom. The collapse of Council military power was followed quickly by political disintegration. Dr. Minji watched from her research station on Mars as reports came in from across the galaxy. The Althari had formally declared independence and established diplomatic relations with humanity. The Vegan Confederacy had voted to withdraw from all Council institutions and form their own government. Even species that had been founding members of the Council were questioning whether the organization served any useful purpose. Colonel Young Ho led the team that occupied the abandoned Council headquarters on Nexus Prime. The massive complex that had once housed the bureaucracy ruling a galaxy was nearly empty. Most staff had fled when it became clear that their government no longer commanded the loyalty of member species. The few remaining officials were processing formal withdrawal requests from species that wanted nothing more to do with Council authority. President So Young addressed the galaxy for the final time as a leader fighting for human freedom. Her broadcast reached every inhabited world, carried by communication networks that no government controlled. She announced that the war was over, not because one side had defeated the other, but because the entire framework for conflict had disappeared. The Galactic Council still existed in theory, but it governed only those species that chose to remain under its authority. Humans had never sought to destroy the Council or rule the galaxy themselves. They had simply refused to accept domination, and their example had inspired others to make the same choice. The galaxy now contained dozens of independent governments, each free to determine its own path. Admiral Hyun-woo stood once again before the great screen in Earth's Strategic Command Center, but now it showed something very different from the threatening Council fleet that had started the crisis. Trade ships from a dozen species docked at orbital stations where goods and ideas flowed freely between worlds. The blockade had been replaced by voluntary exchange between peoples who chose cooperation over coercion. The Free Species Alliance grew from 37 founding members to over 200 within a single year. Unlike the Council, membership was voluntary and could be withdrawn at any time. The Alliance had no authority to impose laws on member species or demand tribute from their citizens. Its only purpose was to facilitate communication and cooperation between free peoples. Some Council loyalists warned that the collapse of central authority would lead to chaos and warfare between competing species. Instead, the galaxy experienced an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity. Without a central government demanding resources and imposing regulations, trade flourished and technological innovation accelerated. Species that had been held back by Council restrictions began exploring and colonizing new worlds at rates not seen in centuries. Jinnah signed the final documents establishing the Alliance's permanent charter. The ceremony took place on New Geneva, a human world that had become the unofficial capital of the new galactic order. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to celebrate not the victory of one people over another, but the triumph of the principle that no one had the right to rule others without their consent. Speaker Vorthak appeared in the historical records one final time in a message broadcast from the remnants of Council space. His words would be studied by scholars for generations as an example of how even those who lose power can find wisdom in defeat. He admitted that the Council had become everything it was created to prevent, a tyrannical government that valued order over justice and control over freedom. The human rebellion had taught the galaxy that diversity of thought and the courage to dissent were not threats to civilization, but its foundation. Different species could work together without surrendering their independence to a central authority. Peace did not require uniformity, and progress was possible without someone in charge of everyone else. Dr. Minji published her final report on the transformation of galactic civilization. Her research showed that the Council system had not just been politically oppressive, but had also stifled scientific and cultural development throughout known space. The explosion of innovation that followed the collapse of central authority demonstrated how much potential had been wasted under the old order. Captain Dong Hyun commanded the first joint human-alien exploration mission to venture beyond the U.S. Galactic Rim. His ship, now bearing the flag of the Free Species Alliance, carried scientists and diplomats from 20 different worlds. They were searching not for new territories to conquer, but for new peoples to befriend and new knowledge to share. The war that began with humanity's refusal to negotiate on unequal terms had ended with a galaxy where negotiation was no longer necessary because no one claimed the authority to impose their will on others. Humans had not conquered their enemies but had convinced them that freedom was better than the alternative. The story would be remembered not as humanity's victory over the Galactic Council, but as the moment when an entire galaxy rediscovered what it meant to be free. The Council had pushed too far, expecting submission and finding defiance instead. In trying to break the human spirit, they had unleashed forces that transformed civilization itself.